Welcome to Trusting After Trauma, Season 4, Beyond Codependency and Narcissistic Abuse. I'm your host, Pi Venus Winslow. Our goal is to provide information and resources to educate and empower viewers to recover from childhood trauma and narcissistic abuse so they can reclaim their health, happiness, and personal power. Our speakers specialize in supporting others through their unique expertise and offer valuable insights, tools, and inspiration for viewers to find the courage and motivation to change their lives. I'm super excited to have Barbara Rubel here with us today. Barbara Rubel is a leading authority and award-winning author on managing complicated loss and secondary traumatic stress. As a nationally recognized keynote speaker, Barbara motivates audiences to build resilience through the lens of vicarious, trauma-informed care. As a thanatologist, her focus is on managing traumatic loss and grief. Barbara has presented to over 1,000 organizations since 1991. As a board-certified expert in traumatic stress and diplomat with the American Academy of Experts in Traumatic Stress, she gives audiences practical wellness strategies. Barbara received a Bachelor in Science in Psychology and a Master of Arts degree in Community Health, with a concentration in thanatology, both from Brooklyn College. She is the author of But I Didn't Get to Say Goodbye, Helping Families After a Suicide, and the 30-hour CE course for nurses, Loss, Grief, and Bereavement, Helping Individuals Cope. Barbara also wrote the CE course COVID-19, Loss, Grief, and Bereavement in 2020, and co-authored the Department of Justice Office for Victims of Crime Training Curriculum, Compassion Fatigue. She is a contributing writer to Thin Threads, Grief and Renewal, Fresh Grief, Coaching for Results, and Keys to a Good Life. You have seen her work in Newsweek, Family Circle, Health, Shape, Fox Business, Life Coach Magazine, Today, and others. 3 weeks prior to giving birth to triplets, her father died by suicide. Her story was featured in the Emmy Award-winning documentary, Fatal Mistakes, Families Shattered by Suicide, narrated by Mariette Hartley. Her website is www.barbararubel.com. Welcome, Barbara. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for sharing my life story.
Yes,
I
well,
need a drink of water after all that.
it's quite a story, and you have so much wisdom to share with others on grief and recovery from loss. So in your bio, you know, you shared about your loss. And so was that what got you interested in the topic of traumatic loss, or was there something else or in addition?
Well, imagine being in the hospital awaiting the birth of not one baby or two babies, but triplets, when my husband came into the room and told me that my father had ended his life. He killed himself. Well, 3 weeks later, I was going to give birth. They kept the babies in utero because they were triplets, so it was a high-risk pregnancy. Never expected my dad to end his life. He had deteriorating discs, couldn't live with the pain. And so me, my family, my friends, everyone who loved him, we have the pain now of being the survivor. And it was very hard at a time when I'm supposed to be so filled with joy over 3 healthy babies. I'm grieving the loss of my dad.
Yeah, wow. So you created a palette of grief that you share with people. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, thank you. Imagine getting up every hour on the hour, taking care of three little babies in the middle of the night. I mean, they were just like 2 or 3 weeks old. And I was painting. I love watercolor. So while I'm waiting for them to get up and I'm exhausted, I was painting a watercolor flower and my hand hit the glass and it spilled all over the paper. And I looked at the flower and it was an absolute mess. And I realized that's what grief is. It's a mess. It's a palette of color, emotional, physical, cognitive, behavioral, religious, spiritual. It's just color. Because I always learned that there were tasks of grief, or there was stages of grief, or there was all these things. I didn't know what I didn't know. But what I learned was that there are no stages. There absolutely, you don't go from bargaining to anger and then back again. Just give that up. That's just for the terminally ill. And it was a model from the 1970s, not for those who are grieving. When we grieve a lifetime of loss. It ebbs and flows. We oscillate in our grief. What that means is we go into our grief, we feel the pain, we drop to the floor, and then we go to a party, or we go through our loved ones' things and we're crying, we're giving them away, or we're sharing them with others. And then we're going out to eat with our friends. We oscillate. It's like going in and out of grief for a lifetime. And there are triggers, and there are anniversary reactions, and there are moments of absolute despair. But that's normal. It's this palette of grief, of color that lasts throughout a lifetime. But the intensity of that grief is not like the very beginning of grief. So that's how I created the palette of grief. I would love to share it. Let me share my screen. So the palette of grief, when we talk about grief, there are so many things that influence the longing, the anger, the confusion, the feeling of guilt or stigma, whatever we're feeling. Everyone has their own grief reactions. There's no, one palette and that's it. Everyone's unique. But there are so many influences. Who found the body? What was it like to view the body? The place of death. What if your loved one died in another state and you couldn't get to them? Who did the death notification? It might have been sudden, unexpected, untimely. My father's death was untimely. He died 3 weeks before I could give birth. So I couldn't even go to the funeral because I'm in the hospital. There might be multiple losses. Your faith, your culture, your ethnicity, all those things will influence how you grieve. Did you have anticipatory grief? When I worked as a hospice bereavement coordinator, the family was allowed to hold the person's hand and say goodbye. With sudden death, there's no anticipatory grief. So that impacts how you grieve. Are you making meaning? Or do you feel like you can't make any sense out of this homicide, AIDS, suicide, accident, cancer, whatever it is, COVID especially? Your grief might be disenfranchised because society doesn't allow you to grieve, or they stigmatize your loss. It might be an ambiguous loss where they're physically absent, but still psychologically still present in your life. Also, proximity, how close you were to them. It doesn't have to be kinship. It could have been a friend from when you were 9 years old and you just found out that they died 20 years later. That's going to impact you. Age of the person who died, the type of griever you are, instrumental or intuitive. Instrumental grievers really don't show their pain. They do not wear their loss on their sleeve. They're not criers. And a lot of people think that these instrumental grievers are not grieving. They are. They're just writing books like me, or they're doing things, or they're helping others. So that's a pattern of grief. We also have to look at other things that are impacting your grief, all the stressors in life. We have so much stress on top of the grief. And what are people saying about your loved one on social media? What about secondary losses? If your spouse was the breadwinner and now you have to sell your home, or your kid has to go to another school, and also dealing with all the non-death related losses. We don't just grieve death, we grieve so much more. Also, how stable is your life? We have to consider your past losses, your childhood abuse, pre-existing trauma. If you have a high ACEs score, your mental health, how you're coping, your adverse childhood experiences, they don't just disappear when you're an adult. They stay with you and they impact how you grieve today. So as I noted before, you oscillate, you go back and forth in your grief, and then you work on Warden's tasks. Try to accept the fact that your loved one really is dead. And that is not easy to do because the reminders are everywhere. And then you process the pain, and it is hard. That's why don't self-medicate, don't drink, don't do drugs. Perhaps go to a support group, reach out to your clergy, your best friend, share stories, do a candle lighting to process how hard it is. And it is so hard. And
Mm.
then you have to adjust to the world where they're missing. They go missing. How do you live your life without them? If your spouse always drove and now you have to drive, you're reminded every time you get in the car that he's dead. If your spouse or your child always did a particular task in the house and now they're dead and you're doing that task, every single time you do it, you're reminded. And those reminders come up all the time, and adjusting to this new world, it's really hard. And last but not least, to find an enduring connection with them. Just because they're dead doesn't mean that they're gone. You create this spiritual connection with them as you embark on a new life. And that's the palette of grief. That's the portrait of loss that is unique to you. And so many of us right now are managing all the losses of COVID. I did a virtual presentation last week for the school system, and they said that teenagers are grieving and crying that they did not attend a prom. So a few minutes ago, I mentioned non-death related loss. That person who always wanted to go to their prom and didn't, it's a major loss. So
Mhm.
when we consider all of the COVID related losses, we are dealing with so much right now in this post-pandemic world. It is really hard. Bottom line, it is just really, really hard.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And for people who are recovering from childhood trauma, narcissistic abuse, like you said, there's grieving the loss of a relationship, grieving the loss of a marriage or a partnership or even a future together, plans for having a future together if the relationship has to end because it's unhealthy or unsustainable.
Yeah, but those non-death related losses are true losses that we grieve. And we have to give ourselves permission to grieve, to feel, to to feel what you're feeling, whatever that is, the emotional, the sadness, the anger, whatever it is we're feeling in our body, the chest pain, the stomach aches, the headaches. It's all real, it's all normal. We just have to acknowledge that we experienced a great loss in life. The problem is when you have non-death related losses, society doesn't recognize them as real. And
Mm.
so you have to reach out to people who get it, who can contain it, who embrace you in whatever it is you're feeling, whether it's non-death or death related loss.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. And yeah, and we all experience many losses throughout our lives. So this palette of grief is, I can see, helpful for all types of losses and a very valuable resource.
It's very needed, especially now in the new DSM-TR-5, which is a book that therapists, psychiatrists, social workers, and physicians use to code. So if you go to them and you're grieving now, they could say, okay, you may be experiencing prolonged grief disorder. And if you are coded in the DSM with prolonged grief disorder, then what they're looking for are these 8 criterion. So what I did with the palette of grief is I took the 8 criterion for prolonged grief disorder. And I tried to explore through the research, how do you deal with these criteria? So if you feel like you have identity confusion, what that means is, am I still a mom if my child is dead? Who am I now? So you look inward as to who you are and recognize that a part of you has died. And sometimes the social attachments that are attached to you in that relationship. So if your child was on a hockey team and you're the hockey mom, and now your child just died by suicide, who are you now? You're not only not a mother, or you're not a hockey mom. So you see who that identity confusion becomes a true problem. You might have this marked sense of disbelief about the death. You just can't believe that your loved one was murdered or suicide, or that your baby died in perio. So you confront the loss, you examine the reality that that person truly is dead, and you focus on the facts. What happened? What was the death surround like? But it gets so painful that many people, because they have this marked sense of disbelief, they talk in metaphors. They can't tell you how it hurts. So they'll say, I feel like I'm drowning. So I would say to them, it feels like the waves are just piling on. Yes, yes. Or it feels like I'm spinning so many plates. And I would say, yes, like they're just crashing around you. Or I feel like I'm on a roller coaster ride, and yeah, like you never can get off. So you see, when you talk in metaphors and you relate to that person who's talking in metaphors, they realize that you get it. What a gift. What a
Mm,
blessing it is, because they can't tell you the depth of their pain. There's
yeah.
also avoidance of reminders of the death. So you have to set these realistic goals, positive self-talk. I can get through this. I'm going to be okay. Tomorrow will be a better day. You could display their things. You can give away their things. But these linking objects, when you have a piece of jewelry that belonged to your loved one, or your dad's fishing pole, or whatever it is, those linking objects help you to be okay with the reminders rather than avoiding them. And also be prepared for the anniversary. It's going to come up before you know it. And the month before is a really hard time. So plan for a distraction. So you know this particular day, week, month, that's the anniversary of the death. What do you have planned? What are you going to do that day, so you don't just sit home in bed? The fourth criterion is intense emotional pain. I'm talking anger or even rage, bitterness, sorrow, because your loved one died.
Mm-hmm.
Many people, many art, journaling, poetry, deep breathing, mindfulness, grounding themselves with breath work, writing, journaling, rituals. The bottom line here is you have to increase your tolerance to deal with this intensity of pain.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people share a calming word. They just keep saying the word over and over again. And there's no right or wrong here. Just do what works for you. If breathing and looking up at the sky and just appreciating that moment of awe, praying, whatever it is, that's up to you. And there's no right or wrong way. It's your way.
Mm-hmm.
The fifth criterion of prolonged grief disorder is difficulty moving on and engaging in an ongoing life. So you might be invited to a party or a wedding. Keep your boundaries. So if you're invited to the wedding, your loved one just died, you don't want to go, maybe you'll just go for an hour and get an Uber home. So you keep your boundaries as you rearrange your entire life and re-engage with people who care about you. There's also this term called thanatechnology. And what that means is that you may not want to go to a support group or reach out to a clergy or a grief therapist. And instead, you go online, and there are blogs and there are support groups virtually. And there's so much on this internet. You just type in your particular loss and support, and see what comes up, because there is a support system out there online, in your community. And so many people volunteer based on the type of loss that they experienced. The sixth criterion is emotional numbness. This is really hard because you don't feel anymore. It's too painful to feel, so you feel nothing. So you have to try to reconnect with your own feelings in your body, your mind, your spirit. You could do that through self-care, exercise, try to get enough sleep, a healthy diet, rearrange how you eat, be creative, dance, poetry. A lot of people in their grief take up dancing because they move their grief. So,
Mhm.
or listen to music, just be kind to yourself. Be kind to yourself rather than beating yourself, saying, I should have done this, I could have done that. Why didn't I do it this way? I love support groups, so consider a support group, or get prolonged grief therapy, prolonged grief disorder therapy. If it's been over a year and the intensity of what we're talking about is really impacting your life, you're not able to live your life.
Mhm.
Next is the seventh criterion, where you feel like life is meaningless. So this is where you find meaning. You make meaning of life. How do you make meaning of your life? Maybe you're creating a support group or writing a book, or you're seeking out moments of awe, looking up at the sky and saying, I'm not alone. I do that all the time. I'm not the only suicide loss survivor. Last week, I was in Colorado with 75 suicide loss survivors at a memorial service, and I knew I wasn't alone. So seek out people who have experienced similar losses. Find meaningful goals in life. What do you want to do with your life? Find joy. Live your values and those spiritual beliefs. Move into those spiritual beliefs, especially through prayer if you believe in a higher power. I love expressing gratitude. What are you grateful for? Are you
Mhm.
grateful for the time that you were able to share with your loved one, even though they're gone now? And
Mhm.
share your narrative, share your story, talk about your loved one, mention their name, and you might even experience post-traumatic growth, grow from the experience. We know how hard it is to lose someone we love. When they are dead, they are robbed from us. That's what it means to be bereaved, that the person is robbed from us. And
Mhm.
grief is all the reactions, and mourning is how we show the world that we are sad because they're gone. So the last but not least is managing the intense loneliness. People are so alone when their loved one dies because they go missing and we miss them. That's what I hear over and over again. So read books, that's bibliotherapy. Go to a Barnes and Noble or your library and read books on managing loss, and especially your particular type of loss.
Mhm.
Look at photos, put them in frames. A lot of people get a tattoo. It's a
Mhm.
spiritual connection with their loved one. Ask for a sign. So at this conference, I asked my dad for a sign, and my dad died by suicide. And I said, after like 3, 4 hours, wow, it's starting, it's 9 o'clock, and I still didn't get a sign. Daddy, why aren't you giving me a sign? And a man came up to me and he said, hi, my name is Alex. I'm going to be, doing the podcast here today. And I said, your name's Alex? That was my dad's name. And
Mhm.
I was, wow, I got my sign. So look for signs, whether they're butterflies or finding a penny, whatever it is, that's so unique for you. And plan for the future. Don't just stay focused on today and the pain of today, but what are you going to do tomorrow? Develop a hobby. You might even start doing the hobby that your loved one did. So if your loved one liked to ride horses, you might say, you know what, I'm going to try to start riding horses. Yeah, whatever it is. Learn a new skill. You have to relearn your world because your assumptive world has been shattered. And you
Mhm.
have to relearn this world where they're missing. The advice that I give to everyone is to continue the bond. That is a grief model by Class Silverman and Class. And what they talk about is that just because your loved one is dead does not mean you have to sever the bond. You keep the bond, you keep that spiritual connection. They are always a part of your life, spiritually connected. So that's why signs are so important. Get involved. So I got involved in suicide prevention and
Mm.
awareness. So we understand grief. We know that we're impacted by this loss. We understand that loss and grief can get complicated. We are not alone. When you do programs like this, people sit back and say, I never realized that why I'm grieving the way I'm grieving. So now we understand we're not going crazy. We're dealing with this normal palette of grief. And we decide how we're going to manage that painful experience. That's the bottom line. No right or wrong. It's your way, and that's the right way.
Mm, beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing this amazing palette of grief with us. So, Barbara, thank you so much for sharing that. And I can also say from my own experience, I lost my father when I was 18, and his death was untimely or unexpected, although I wasn't surprised because he had an alcohol addiction that was pretty bad. The last time I saw him was at my high school graduation, and he had passed away just like a month or two later. And so I definitely, as a young woman, just fresh out of high school and fresh out of home, trying to navigate my way through life, I can really resonate with what you're sharing about that process. And I especially appreciate you talking about those stages of grief, because I always thought I was doing grieving wrong, because I thought I was supposed to move from stage to stage, and that wasn't my experience at all.
I am very sorry about your dad's death. And it doesn't matter if it was 20 years ago, 5 days ago, or 50 years ago. When we lose someone we love, that impacts the way we look at our world. And there are so many people like you who think that they have to go through stages. So I think we educated them today that it's a lifelong process that ebbs and flows. Go into it, come out of it, try to do the tasks, continue the bond, and know that you're not alone, that there are support groups and online virtual events. And we're going to be able to get through this if we
Mhm.
talk about it. And I thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to talk about loss and grief. This is a topic many don't want to talk about. And there might be some people who are watching today saying, wow, I feel a little better, if they could even say that. Or, wow, I think this program, I think now I understand what I'm going through a little better. So if
Mhm.
we could ease the pain even just a little bit, then we did a great job. That's the
Yes.
bottom, because it's hard to grieve. It's painful. It
Mhm.
really, when that person, or even a pet, because people grieve their dog, their cat, or
Yeah.
whatever pet, it is such a major loss. So know that you're not alone, that we care about you, that people actually do care, and surround yourself with people who get it, and don't talk to those who say the wrong thing, because they will say the wrong thing. I'll just give you a very quick example. I'm a keynote speaker. I'm on stage. I'm speaking at a mental health congress. It's over. They clapped. I'm about to get off the stage, and someone comes onto the stage and says to me, Barbara, that was a great keynote. Thank you. But you do know your father's in hell. Okay. I'm also a pastoral bereavement counselor. So I just said, God bless you. Because I couldn't hit her. I'm getting paid. I'm a speaker, so you can't hit the person. But my goodness, how do you say things like this? People will say the wrong thing. I can't tell you how many mothers I've spoken to who have had the perinatal loss, and their babies died in utero. And people will come up to them and say, you'll have another baby. Just like
Mm.
that. Not even, I'm so sorry for your loss, but you're young, you'll have another kid. just make sure you surround yourself with people who try to hold you in your grief. And
Yeah.
remember, like what I said before, you are not alone. It's the most important thing.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, thank you, Barbara. You are amazing, and
Mhm.
I can see why people have you speak like all over the world, all over everywhere to talk about grieving. And it is a part of our lives. It is part of the human condition, and we all experience it in many ways. So I appreciate your time today. And oh, you have a free gift that you're going to share with our audience. So could you tell us about that?
Yes. Thank you. The palette of grief, what you see here is on my website. And my website is my name, www.barbararubel.com. That's RUBEL.com. And just go to the gifts or whatever's on the top tab. You click on that, and I think it says resources, and you could download it. And check back in about 3, 4 months, because I will actually be putting on there the other free resource, which is the palette of grief activity. It's a 10-page activity on creative way to manage loss, but that's coming out in about 3 months. But you can get this for free right now, make a copy of it, share it. A lot of therapists are actually using it because they're just learning about prolonged grief disorder. It's a brand new disorder.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you, Barbara. That's very generous of you. And we will provide the link for people to be able to pick up that free gift from you. So thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you for being here today, for sharing your expertise and this amazing gift with us. And I just really appreciate you being here with us today.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you. And thank you to everybody who's watching for joining us for Trusting After Trauma Season 4. We hope you enjoyed this journey with our experts on how we can move beyond codependency and narcissistic abuse to heal our body, mind, and spirit to live joyful, authentic lives.